and welcome to today's ISCA ICAN webinar series. Today we have Bo Pinkham, the Director of Crisis Intervention Services for the Crisis Center in Johnson County, here to talk about Your Life, Iowa. I want to thank Bo for joining us, and before I turn it over to him, just a couple housekeeping items. We're going to keep everyone on mute to reduce background noise for the recording. We are recording the webinar. It will be posted on both the ISCA and ICAN websites along with the PowerPoint by the end of the week. And if you have questions during the webinar, go ahead and type them into the question box, and Bo has agreed to answer those questions as they come in. So again, thank you for joining us, and Bo, it's all yours.
All right, thank you so much, Britt. Thank you for inviting me onto this, and I'm really excited to kind of share what we've been doing with Your Life Iowa, what that actually is, and how it might help all of you kind of in the school counseling profession get better resources to the children that you serve. So yeah, my name's Bo Pinkham. Like Britt said, I'm the Crisis Intervention Services Director. Just a brief background on me because nobody really cares about that. But I started volunteering at the Crisis Center in the Crisis Intervention Program back in 2002. Back then it was just one phone line. And then about 5 years ago, they made the mistake of hiring me, one that they can't take back, and I started as a program coordinator for the Crisis Intervention Program. And then just recently, in January, I was promoted to director, which is where I find myself now. So we'll just get right into it. So Your Life Iowa is the statewide suicide prevention and bullying prevention service through Iowa Department of Public Health. And it's got 4 services attached to it. Well, 3 services, and then I added outreach because that's something that we're always just continually doing as an agency under one umbrella or another. But we have a phone line, a statewide phone line that we answer, a chat service, and a text service, and then we do some outreach as well. I should say that we are the contract holder and then have Foundation 2, which is a crisis center in Lynn County. They subcontract with us and provide some of the services during the day for about a 6-hour window, and then we do the rest of the hours of the day. Most services are 24 hours. The text service currently is not, just because of the way that the funding broke down. So brief background on what crisis intervention is, because some of you might not know what that is. I'm going to assume most of you have like a basic idea of what it is, but we'll just go through. So crisis intervention, as we define it at our center, is very short-term counseling. Our sweet spot is like talking about upwards of maybe 24 to 48 hours into the future, but we don't really go beyond that. So we're certainly not therapy. We don't pretend to be therapists. Right now, we do have some clinicians on staff, but they're not like in a therapist role here with us. A lot of our services are volunteer-driven. Some of our overnight services are done directly by staff because nobody wants to volunteer between the hours of 11 p.m. and 8 a.m., which is fine. So some of the services get split up between volunteers and staff, but primarily we're volunteer-driven, and we wouldn't be able to provide everything that we do without volunteers. We focus on referrals and action planning once we get through kind of the emotional meat of the conversation. So we'll provide referrals to local agencies in their area. Or do some action planning. Again, that action plan generally just kind of assumes a whole, what's your self-care look like for tonight? What are you going to be doing tomorrow? If suicide is mentioned, what's your safety plan for that? We do focus on suicide prevention. All of our counselors go through the Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, which is the best practice training of SAMHSA. And they have to go through that training before they're able to provide services with us. We also use various risk assessments. Right now, ASSIST comes with its own risk assessment. We combine that with the National Suicide Lifeline's risk assessment questions to do risk assessment for our clients. And then finally, we are able to follow up with clients either by phone or by email, where we can provide follow-up on like whether or not they went to scheduled appointments or if they had a bad night, a lot of motivational stuff just to see how they're doing, if they made it through the night, how things are looking the next day. It's a good check-in, especially with suicide safety plans. It allows us to kind of continue to have a little bit of ongoing relationship with the person while also kind of sticking within our sweet spot of the 24 to 48-hour window. So that's crisis intervention in a nutshell. Again, I'm going to assume you're pretty familiar with active listening models, motivational interviewing. We use our own model that was kind of developed for a lot of agencies in the area in the 70s, which is when a lot of crisis centers popped up. And we've been using it quite a while. We continually revise our training and, what we're doing. We've really begun working some trauma-informed care into our services as well. So yeah, so that's a little bit about us and kind of how we do things. So let's start with the Your Life Iowa's phone line. So as you can see, we had 395 calls in fiscal year 16. As you can realize, that's really not that many calls. It's also from mostly out-of-state adults. That's because the agency, who I will not name by name, who had the contract before us, I don't know what they did with that number, but they must have advertised it some places on the internet. And there are people who find and contact crisis lines even if they're out of state, even if they're listed as Iowa Youth Suicide phone lines. If they're an out-of-state adult, they don't really care. And that's fine. We'll still see the needs of the clients. But I put in big bold letters, and this is probably not a surprise to you, kids hate phone calls. I don't think there's people in my training classes who are like 18 to 19. I don't know if they realize their phones can be used as phones. And that's fine. So, most of those calls are going to be out-of-state adults and not really relevant to this conversation. I will say that when we do get youth calling in on the 24-hour phone line, it's generally for physical health help. So they'll have questions about their own physical health, a lot of sexual health questions, a lot of ideas. They don't know if they're getting pregnant. They don't know what this means if they're going through something on their menstrual cycle. Where to get condoms, a lot of sexual health questions, and then just general physical health questions. The thing is, we're not doctors, and we can't really help them with that, so we're open and genuine, and we'll refer them to agencies in their area that can, if they're open to that suggestion. And then we get a lot of pranks, too, because children continue to be rapscallions, even in 2017. We try to shut those down in a kind and calm way because they're still reaching out and shows that still might need support at some point in their lives. So we're very genuine about it, but we're also, any crisis line is pretty used to prank calls, so we just deal with that as it comes. So really, that's the phone line. I wish I had more information for you on that was relevant to you, but children don't call, kids don't call lines anymore. It's just how it is. But I'll tell you what they do. They chat a ton. So we had 1,078 engaged chats in fiscal year 16 out of 1,682 received. I know that number seems like we're only seeing 2/3 of the contacts are able to see to them. That's because of just the massive amount of growth in chat in such a short period of time, and the fact that sometimes those chats, we'll get to them within 5 minutes, but they've already been abandoned. So we kind of list those as abandoned chats. So we were able to see to them, they just left the chat too early. But still 1,078. So as you can see, about almost triple the number that we see with phone calls. And chat is much more likely to be Iowa youth. Specifically, females age 14 to 17 is kind of our huge demographic on all of our chat services, but especially the Iowa youth chat that we answer. So there's several reasons for why youth are more likely to do that, not just because of their familiarity with the technology. A lot of people, but especially youth, go through what's called the online disinhibition effect, which is they're much more able to open up about these things while online, rather than either in person, over the phone, or what have you. That's just a lot of psychological research on that. So people will specifically go on a website and start a chat because they feel that they're much more anonymous, which isn't actually true. Just we have resources to find them if they are saying that they're going to have active thoughts of suicide or anything like that, and follow through on a specific attempt. But they feel more anonymous. And so they're much more likely to open up. They're also much more likely than our phone callers to open up about a really wide variety of topics. and this is kind of where like the meat and potatoes of chat gets into, is it's kind of why we love chat, because they're just so diverse in what topics that they present. But we see a lot of non-suicidal self-injury, or NSSI, just issues with school in general, suicide thoughts. People are much more likely to open up about suicide on chats than phone calls. Our chats, or our phone calls, have about a 5 to 10% ratio of people like wanting to open up about suicide. On chats, it's over 50% of our chatters talk about suicide as a presenting issue. So that's not to say that the people calling us don't have those thoughts of suicide, but just because they're speaking to another live person who's breathing on the phone, they don't feel comfortable opening up about it, which is okay, but that's why it's great that chat has really kind of taken over the crisis intervention world, because people are much more likely to open up about everything that's going on. Especially with youth, they talk about relationships a lot, just so much they talk about relationships. I can't stress enough how much they talk about relationships, and that's why I have all those capital letters there. And that's its own fun thing, and I'm sure you all can relate to the fact that, youth see everything in pretty much black and white, and so once they get dumped, they're never going to find love again, and what is love anyway except this universal constant that only just disappoints us, all that fun stuff. So they'll open up about relationships in a big way, and it's kind of interesting to see our volunteers and staff interact with them, just because we have to kind of toe the line of how much we can self-disclose about, like, well, I was in a relationship when I was in high school and blah, 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 blah. So relationships put us as crisis intervention counselors in kind of a weird space, but we get through it okay. We just fall back on our model and make sure that the person feels heard and validated. And then finally, LGBTQ issues, which kind of works in relationships a little way, but just LGBTQ issues in general find their way into chat way more than phones or text, which I'll talk about next. And that's that's a burgeoning market as well. We don't see it a lot. Like you would think that it would be all over the place, but honestly, if you haven't heard of Trevor Project, you probably have. They have kind of done a great job of kind of locking down, I'm going to use a business term, that market online, just because they are just tremendous at providing support for LGBTQ youth online with just a bevy of services. So we still get LGBTQ youth, but not probably as many of Trevor Project and it exists. But it's good that they exist. So, and then we'll go to text. So text is a really interesting thing. As you can see, we didn't really have that many texts in fiscal year 16. But I'll say that I didn't have a comprehensive list of the fiscal year 17 stats that we're still working on, but we've already reached beyond 114 texts, and we still have 3 months to go, something like that. So text is kind of blowing up, and actually, if you look at nationwide stats, it's blowing up in crisis intervention just across the country. There's now the crisis text line, or CTL, which is a nationwide number that people can text and kind of do crisis intervention over text. And so we're in a kind of a weird spot with it, because not only do people not really know how to engage us in crisis texting, they'll text us and they're like, I don't know how to do this. Do I just keep texting you and stuff like that? And we kind of have to walk them through it. But we also have difficulties on the crisis intervention side responding to people via text. There's a lot of, like I said, still finding its voice. It's really tough for us to deal with, because people who are texting us feel they can just put their phone down and then 15 minutes later, text us again. Meanwhile, on our end, we're kind of freaking out because we haven't heard from this person in 15 minutes, and they've mentioned, having thoughts of suicide or something like that. So we have kind of a rigor on our end and kind of this anxiety that they don't on their end, because to them, it's just a normal text conversation. On our end, it all comes through the same web portal, so it looks functionally about the same as a chat, except for some minor differences. So we're kind of still finding our space with that, but it's definitely been awesome just to see a lot of people who don't have good access to a computer, and sometimes the chat programs don't work very well on phones or tablets or anything like that. They can just text us if they have an unlimited text plan, and really kind of open up about things. So we have a pretty eclectic mix of who contacts us. We have Iowa youth, Iowa adults. Thankfully, since text is so new, it's mainly Iowa people, which I'm sure makes the Iowa Department of Public Health happy. But right now, I'd say it's about 50% youth, 50% adults. And when I say adults, I don't just mean like maybe 18 to 24. We'll have people in their 40s text us as well. The topics are all over the place. Going back to the chat, it's relatively similar to chat. A little less non-suicidal self-injury, a little less school, more suicide thoughts, even more relationships. People text with their friends about relationships all the time. It's kind of how they process those thoughts, and so they'll start texting us about their relationships as well. And again, so the average length of a text conversation with us, and that's average, mind you, is about hour and 20 minutes. With a chat, it's about 40 minutes, and then with a phone call, it's about 15 minutes or so. So text is significantly longer than a phone call and relatively longer than a chat as well. That also makes it difficult because our volunteer shifts don't generally last longer than 2 to 3 hours, and so we need to we're trying to kind of organize our schedule in a way that people would be able to take text and still kind of get off at the end of their designated shift time. It doesn't really matter for staff though. Yeah, so like I said, those numbers are blowing up. And then, where we go from here, and this is kind of a little insider info. So Your Life Iowa is not very new. It's about, like I'd say, 4 to 5 years old. There was a contract holder before we held the contract, and they've now put the RFP out again. What Iowa is going to be doing is it's going to be combining its problem gambling, substance abuse, and then the 2 current Your Life Iowa services, youth suicide and bullying prevention. It's going to combine all those services into one service that it's going to call Your Life Iowa. That's not how I would have done it, but that's how they're doing it. And so what we're going to have to do is, if we do get the contract again, or whoever gets the contract, we'll really have to kind of be vigilant on staying on topic with training and expanding to those problem gambling and substance abuse topics. Those, I've taken a look at those services. They don't get nearly as much traffic as youth suicide and bullying, the Your Life Iowa stuff, as it is now. I'm going to assume that's going to continue to be true. So for now, our focus will pretty much always be on youth suicide and bullying, which I haven't really mentioned bullying here because, as you can tell from chat, bullying doesn't actually come up a lot in any of our contacts with any of Iowa youth. There's also kind of a myth that bullying will lead people to consider suicide, which statistically that's not actually true. There is some correlative stuff there, but it's not nearly causative, and it's kind of a myth that we're trying to dispel. So we're going to try to continue to advertise and expand the services. That's kind of one of the reasons I'm doing this here. Also, just I like teaching people. We're trying to be even more involved with some of the the statewide conferences. There's a Safe Schools Conference next week that you'll see us at. The Iowa Public Health Conference next week, you'll see us there as well. We really want to encourage growth in Iowa. When we inherited the service, like I said, there was a ton of outside of Iowa people. And again, we're happy to serve anyone who calls the service and says they're in need, but the focus of this service is supposed to be for Iowa youth. And we want to see that grow, and we have since we've been stewards of the contract. It's been slow and steady growth in those areas, and we just want to see it continue. And then we need to be constantly vigilant on new trends. Counseling via social media is kind of the new unicorn that people want to ride into the future. It's very difficult. Facebook and Instagram have made some headlines recently and made some progress towards kind of making that happen, but it's very difficult just because those are privately run companies that just happen to have millions of users. So it's like they're a giant national park that everyone's playing in, but they're privately owned. They can do whatever they want. So they don't have to play nice with the suicide prevention and crisis intervention communities. They are trying. and they've been better than they have been, but it's not easy for us to just like say put a button on the Your Life Iowa Facebook website and say you can talk to a counselor right now. We'd have to link to our website and then have people start a chat or text with us or call the phone line. And that's not ideal. You know, we want to reduce barriers rather than keeping them up. So as Facebook and Instagram and whatnot make things easier for us to do maybe some counseling via social media, look for us to move into that space as soon as possible. And then I don't have any more slides, but you know, I'll just kind of generally say, you know, the way that you as school counselors could use us is if you just go to which I don't even know if I have the website. I'm terrible at this. So if you just go to yourlifeiowa.org or .com, I think they own both domains. You can find all the services listed there. If you have attendees going to the conferences next week in Des Moines, we'll have stuff there. I don't have my email, but if you just do bo.pinkham at, you know what, yeah, okay, I'll give you my email later. And then you can email me or someone else at our agency, and we're happy to give you online stuff that you can print out, or maybe send some stuff to your school personally. If you're within a relative good driving distance of our area, we could probably send someone to your school too. So, you know, we're happy to make inroads to whatever area you need us to be in. Yeah, but otherwise, you know, I wanted to make the joke that if you see, and you're school counselors, so you're probably not actually teaching classes, but if you see kids texting in class, if they're not texting each other, they might be texting us. But we do get kids who text us in class, which is not fun for the counselors because usually they have to like look up and answer questions and they'll go back to texting and it's another 5-minute wait for us to get a response. But children are using our services more and more, and we're really happy about that. So if you're feeling like you notice that some of your kids that you counsel really have an easier time making connections with people online, or they're part of a lot of online communities, one of my personal pet projects is to look at, you know, suicide prevention and online counseling in the streaming sphere with Twitch and anything like that. If you don't know what Twitch is, shame on you. You should learn what Twitch is because all your kids that you counsel are probably talking about it. You know, so if you find that you have kids that are just not able to kind of make a personal connection with you, but they kind of love the online sphere, Your Life Iowa is a great way for them to kind of get in touch with caring and empathetic people. Again, we're not therapists, so we can't do any long-term counseling with them, but sometimes just starting things off and just like getting someone to open up about what's going on. A lot of times our action plans do involve like, you know, could you speak to your counselor now about what's going on, or do you think you could open up to your parents about how you've been feeling, you know, stuff like that. You know, we try to be as accessible as possible, and that's only going to continue with the new RFP, no matter who gets the contract. And I have talked like constantly for 25 minutes. I'm going to take a brief quick drink of water. Are there any questions yet?
If anyone has any questions, now is the time to go ahead and type them in. We don't have any yet. I guess one question I have, sure. What is Twitch?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, well, Twitch is a online streaming website / process, basically, and it was recently sold for $1 billion, I think, to Amazon, and it is the third most usage of bandwidth online next to Netflix and YouTube. And what it is people start streaming. Usually it started off with video games, but now people stream like watching Bob Ross do painting. They stream like live events. They just stream kind of like video blogs and stuff like that. And it is, like, if you look at the rate of how much Twitch has grown over the years, it's just astronomical. It's children, like, and especially youth, especially teen youth, but, you know, I mean, it's always trending younger these days, are just absolutely in love with this platform. And if they don't know about it now, they will at some point because it's kind of just taking over. And so what people do is they'll stream themselves playing video games, or they'll stream themselves like watching TV or something like that. And that sounds inconspicuous, but these chat rooms can start numbering like hundreds of people, and people get like, their own followings in Twitch or whatnot, and so a community develops around these streamers or particular streams. And it's just fascinating to watch kind of youth interact with that and kind of how they build community in this day and age. Like it's a very organic process, even though it's, through this online platform. And so what I'm interested in is looking into, could we do some kind of crisis intervention in that sphere, or like do we need to partner with Twitch or any like-minded streamers on like thoughts of like suicide prevention or whatnot? It's really just like all up in the air right now, but yeah, Twitch, like it's been my rallying cry for a few years is no one in the suicide prevention industry knows what Twitch is, and working for nonprofits, I'm sure you all can relate, working for public schools and whatnot, is you're kind of always 5 to 10 years behind technological advances, and that's just not going to cut it anymore, because it's eventually going to advance to the point where people are having entire interactions with their support systems, and we have no idea where they are, what those interactions look like, whether or not they're healthy, and how we could get involved with it. So I'm trying to head that off at the pass. So that's what Twitch is. It's but yeah, you really should just go and give it a look. And if you don't, I mean, I don't like it because I'm 33 and I'm like, this scares me. But it's never going to go away, or unless it gets sold and renamed. And it's really blowing up. I mean, South Park was doing episodes on it, I'd say 2 to 3 years ago, so they had their finger on the pulse. But it's just gotten bigger since then.
Okay. Next question from one of our attendees. What types of tasks do your volunteers do, and what qualifications do they have?
Sorry, what types of tasks?
What types of tasks do your volunteers do, and what qualifications do they have?
Oh, that's a good question. So our volunteers do crisis intervention. They can do, they'll either do a phone shift, which is answering some of our phone lines, or they'll do a chat and text shift, which is answering the chat or text lines online. But they do nothing but crisis intervention. We train them, we give them a 60-hour training. That's 30 hours of coursework, 15 hours of what we call a mentorship program, which is where they come and get supervised. They learn the ins and outs of our center, and they always take their first few contacts with us under direct supervision with a supervisor listening in and looking in, giving them feedback or whatnot. And then they do 15 hours of what I said was the ASSIST training, the Applied Suicide Intervention Skills training, and that's the training that focuses really hard on suicide. It's a wonderful training, by the way. If you know of any ASSIST trainings in your area, it's just a phenomenal training, and I would highly recommend it for anyone who might even like vaguely have interactions with people who are having suicide thoughts or feelings. So yeah, they go through about 60 hours. They get pretty much a constant stream of feedback on their calls, chats, and texts from some of our supervisors, and then also from me and one of my partners in crime, the crisis intervention supervisor. But yeah, we don't really require them to do, I mean, they can always help us out with other projects, but otherwise they're just they're just the front lines of doing crisis intervention for us.
Okay, any other questions from the group?
And while you're doing that, I will write out my email so other people can have it. There you go. Okay.
Well, thank you again for all the information. I know I found it really interesting. Definitely a change of pace for my day-to-day. And we will post the recording of the webinar on the ISCA and ICAN websites by the end of the week. And Bo, if you could send me the updated PowerPoint again, I will connect that as well.
Okay, great.
Thanks, everybody. And Bo, thank you again for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Everyone have a great afternoon.